morning, George. Good morning, Sonia.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome back to the Moving Project. We are here to launch our Season 2 of the Moving Project, and I'm very happy to be joined by George and Sonia on this project, two students from Ottawa U, two former president of the Student Association of the Law School, which I was part as well 20 years ago. So it's an honor for me to be with youngster, and we're going to try this season to talk more about the identity, how we see Canadian identity, Canadian values, and we will spend the next few weeks interviewing newcomers to Canada, students that are joining our college, our universities, and dreams about moving to Canada. So I was taking this opportunity to discuss what's the value that defines the Canadian identity, because it's something that is not settled yet. And I really believe that getting a better understanding and appreciation of what the Indigenous people means for Canadians and the relationship we have with them, as well as language, culture, those are a big part of the Canadian identity and all the symbols that define Canada identity. So this is what we were going to be talking today. And I want to recognize the impact of the promotion of gender equality and the protection of human rights for Canadians and cultural diversity in shaping our country. And finally, and this is why I'm happy that you joined me, both of you, because you represent multiculturalism of Canada. And it's at the center, in my view, of what defines Canadian identity and Canadian values. The question of what it means to be Canadian, what moral, political, or spiritual perspective it involves, has been a difficult and much debated one. Some people see the question itself as central to that identity. The main reason for this is that Canadians have never reached anything close to a consensus on a single, unified conception of the country. According to some observers, this is because fundamental social division prevents such a conception from taking shape. First, there is a separation between the Indigenous people and the European colonists and their descendants. That would be a good way to identify myself, as my family generations, been here for 13 generations on my dad's side and 5 generations on my mom's side. So I cannot consider myself an immigrant in some perspective. The second, there is separation between the famous two solitude. This term referred originally to those colonists with either French or British ancestry. And we can get into that debate that been the political and defining the political scene of Quebec and Canada for many years. And I think it's important to see the perspective of how the language and the culture have played into defining how Canada is governed. And finally, and I think that's the most important for us, the third extensive immigration after the Second World War has produced a polyethnic society. Some see that as incompatible with a unified idea of the country. And this is where I want to dive in, because Canada cannot keep growing without immigrants. Canada will continue to have waves of immigrants. We're now aiming at getting 500,000 new immigrants every single year. This is more than 1.5 to 2% of growth of our population. And that's beautiful, because Canada have a beautiful land. So this is a little bit what I want to achieve today and having this discussion with you. And let's start with you, George. What's your background? Where you're from? And tell us more about you.
So, thank you, Michael. That's an excellent introduction. So, I'm George Monastiriakos. I'm originally from Laval, Quebec. I'm a law graduate from the University of Ottawa. I studied at McGill University before that. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm interested in politics, immigration, of course. I guess that about sums it up for me.
And what about you, Sonia? Tell us more about your background.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be back for Season 2, and I think that what we're going to talk about in this season is so important, not only for the future, but also to understand why we spent so much time in Season 1 talking about immigration programs for entrepreneurs. Canada is the best country in the world. It's ranked number 1, and I think one of the reasons why it's such a great country is because although we are all different, that's what makes us united. And we have such an accepting country. So my name is Sonia. I am a fourth-year civil law student. I'm also completing at the same time a bachelor's in international development. I grew up on the south shore of the island of Montreal to two parents that immigrated here in 1997. So they both come from different countries, but what I love about Canada is the fact that whether it's at home or outside, it's so welcoming and you're always able to live your own truth in your life with your culture in Canada in general. So I'm very excited to speak more.
Which country your parents were coming from?
So my father is from Algeria and my mother, she was born in Ukraine. And so it's very interesting because they both come from countries that do not necessarily have the great concept of democracy. And that's and they decided to come in Quebec because like my father always tells people he wanted to live America in French. So that's why. And they love Canada. They wouldn't switch it for anything in the world. And I feel very lucky. I feel like I won the lottery by being born here.
That's fantastic. And what about George? Where your parents come from?
So my dad was actually born in Canada to Greek parents, and my mom was born in Greece to Greek parents as well.
Yeah.
My family came here in the late 1960s on my mom's side, primarily because my grandfather's brother was already here, and I mean, ils l'ont parrainé la famille de...
They sponsored your family.
Exactement, ouais.
Yeah.
So, for me, growing up in Montreal, in Laval, I grew up in a very multicultural community in Chamonix. I went to Greek school in for elementary, so I learned Greek, French, and English.
Yeah.
It was... it's something that is very surprising when I go back to Greece, for example, and I tell them, I went to school and I learned in Greek. Greek history, Greek Orthodox religion. It was very unique, and I think that's something that's probably uniquely Canadian.
Yeah.
I know that Armenian community has a similar program, Jewish community, of course, in Montreal as well. So I'm excited to be here too for season 2 as well. So thank you for
and you're joining us this season, so it's going to be very interesting to get your perspective on this and the multicultural background. So I want to jump in a discussions with you because the relationship of the current government in Canada towards the Indigenous people and the discussion that most politicians have been having for as long as I've been observing politics, it's a challenging discussions between the political institutions and the Indigenous people. And when we look at this from the immigration perspective, it's very interesting because there's always debate in the society on whether we should have more or less immigration. And we often see ourselves, and being white Canadians and what we call the source, and some people kind of go into of my families or I can see discussions where they say, we're here first, it's our way, but then you look at the Indigenous people and they could have the same perspective than that debate against immigration that we have in our society sometime, and that we see more and more in the right wing side of the spectrum, of political spectrum. So I want to hear you, how do you see this dynamic going on between Indigenous people and the parallel we can do with the immigration debate?
I'll let you begin, Jay.
So I think in terms of reconciliation, I think that we still have quite a long way to go in Canada in terms of reconciling between, I guess, the colonist portion of the Canadian population, which is the overwhelming majority, and the Indigenous population of Canada, particularly as pertains to residential schools, for example. I think we've taken a step in the right direction, inviting the Pope here just a couple of weeks ago, and taking a tour of Canada, Edmonton, Quebec, Nunavut, and apologizing to communities. I don't know if that's enough for the communities, given how deep those wounds go. But I also think that there's another interesting perspective here because, like you said, 13 generations for on your dad's side.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
It's a long time, man.
So, I mean, your family's been here for centuries.
Yeah,
right?
Literally, yeah.
So, I mean...
Well, when I look at my DNA, I did a 23andMe, and my origin has nothing to do with Canada. I'm European.
Wow.
And because we still define it this way. There's no such things at the moment. There's indigenous people origin in terms of DNA, the way it's qualified scientifically speaking. And there's European. I have a mix of European, like I'm a British, Irish, French, northern part of Europe. That's probably my Viking blood, you know. And but in terms of having French Canadian DNA, there's no such things. There's no such things. So this is why I have a 1%, which I passed to my son, which is very interesting actually. I had this 1% of indigenous blood, right? And it's very interesting in that sense, because obviously I don't identify myself as an indigenous person. But I identify myself as a Canadian, and my identity in that sense is very strong. I mean, I carried it for 20 years around the world while I lived abroad, and I have my Canadian passport flashing that around. So, no. I would not say that I have any type of indigenous rights. Reconciliation is important. The challenge I have with that debate is to say, how do we harmonize this vision that I'm an immigrant too? Actually, I want to consider myself more as an immigrant on the land. And the minute we start saying this, that 200 years, 300 years, is just part of that melt pot of different cultural background. And that's what we're going to talk later on. How do we integrate our new immigrant and we educate them that there was First Nation here on the land? But how do we go further and we have this conversation that they're as Canadian as I am? And we start that debate of origin. And this will allow us to move forward on welcoming more people. Because we're all part of one community. It's been 1,000 years for indigenous people that they were on this land. It's been for 300, 400 years for my family on this land. And some new immigrants, like your parents, they've been around for 30, 40 years. And there's new immigrants every week that land in Canada. If the society want to keep growing with solid values, and we can talk about what those values are, I think we need to reconcile the fact that the indigenous people needs to join us. And this is where I have a very hypocrite, like the sense of imposter when I have this discussion saying, well, okay, I'm the typical white dude, right? Like having this conversation. Can I have this conversation? Can I say that I want the indigenous people to be part of this integration? They were here first.
Well, if I can add something to put it into perspective, from what I've learned from, my experiences, I always try to not talk for the Indigenous peoples of Canada just because I think, they are the ones that are going to set the terms for reconciliation and for what they want and what they need. Like but to put into perspective, on my father's side in Algeria, he is Kabyle, and Kabyles, like the Berbers, they are considered as the indigenous people of North Africa. They've been here for 10,000 years. And one thing that I know is a very big fight in Algeria is the recognition of our language, of our culture, of our customs. This is what's important for us. It's not to be pitied. It's not to be, in a sense, to give us advantages. It's just to be recognized and treated equally as others. So in my opinion, I think that's what we simply need to do in the Indigenous people. It's important to recognize them. It's important to recognize what Canada, the institution, has done to them in the past, continues to do to them today, and simply give them that space to express what they need. And they are as Canadian as us. They are part of Canada, in so many places around the world, whenever we talk about Canadian culture, in a sense, they always showcase Indigenous peoples and their cultures. So I think they are an integral part of Canada. They are almost at the base, I would say. And it's just the important part is just if we want to reconcile even them with the concept of immigration, we simply just need to recognize them.
Yeah, yeah. As a people of their own, as a culture of their own. Mm-hmm. And then what I like to use with that discussions is to neutralize a little bit the anti-immigration discussions from the right wings, from a certain group of people in our society that is growing. I believe it's fair to say that there's a growing fear of the other. And from the moment we start saying like, hey, scientifically speaking, there's no such thing as a Canadian DNA. We were not here long enough. Canadian society been evolving over the years through multiculturalism, and there's no such things as white people in Canada more than there's Greek and Ukrainians and Chinese and Vietnamese and other community. It's kind of neutralized the debate a little bit, and I love that aspect of being able to say like we're all from somewhere else, some other places. Sorry, like we're all from somewhere else. And over the years, we build this beautiful multicultural society, and then we need to welcome more to keep growing that with strong structure, strong values that allow us to move forward together. And then once we recognize that, I feel like we're going to have some win in ourselves, like to be able to move faster. So that's my 2 cents on it. Yeah.
And I think that when I look at these anti-immigration movements, what we find the most a lot is ignorance. It's just that they are not aware of the many facets of other people's lives, cultures. But I think what's the most important is that people are scared of other people's values.
Yeah.
When you grow up in other countries, I'm not going to name a particular country, but for example, if you just go to Asia or the Middle East, they have completely different values, completely different lifestyles than what we are used to in Canada. And I think that we can reconcile that fear of immigration, that in a sense, people that just don't want to have immigrants, with the fact that we just need to ensure that the people that come here understand Canadian values, like you've said before, multiculturalism, gender equality, which is very important.
Yep.
We also have the rule of law, which is
fundamental in our society.
For us, it seems like something that's so natural, especially we're all in the field of law, but this is not something that is given to everyone around the world. So as long as we make sure that the people that come here understand that these are Canadian values, you're free to be whoever you want. Freedom is one of also the pillars of our society, but just to be aware of these values, I think if we ensure that this is done in the right way, we'll be able to push a little bit this fear of immigration.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I would like to just add to that. I think that in terms of Canada, geopolitically, we're blessed by geography. We have two oceans that protect us from the opposite sides of the world, Europe and Asia.
Yeah.
We also have the most powerful state on earth on our southern border.
And and Santa Claus at the top.
Yes, exactly. Which is basically impossible to traverse unless you fly. So when you think about that, Canada has the potential to be really one of the most powerful countries in the world.
I love that, yeah.
It has the potential. When you think about it, we need as many immigrants as possible, not only because we want to build our country internally, but we want to build our country globally. We want to be a global power.
Yep.
And when you break it down, right now we have an aging population. In 20 years from now, all the baby boomers are going to be retiring. And the working population is going to have to offset all those costs to pay their pensions and to pay to help support this aging population. So we need to keep on welcoming immigrants every day, every year. And I would say 500,000 is an ambitious target, but for me, I want 1 million per year.
Yeah.
I want to keep growing the population and building this beautiful country of ours and expanding our influence around the globe. It's the best thing for our state, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's I always joke about that when I meet potential immigrants, telling them that Canada have the second biggest country in the world, but we have one problem to grow our economy. We don't have enough people. We are, and now we're seeing it because unemployment rate is super low, and we go to restaurants that are closed on lunchtime because they don't have a chef, because they don't have waitress. We see it in our tech industry, right? We need more talents to keep growing our business. Otherwise, people will go elsewhere to work. To grow our economy, we need more people. Absolutely. And if we build it, they will come. The housing problems is a beautiful example of that. We need to build more housing in order to welcome more people. People need a roof over their head, right? So we need to gear ourselves. I feel we don't hear enough about this in the public debate. We want immigration. We want to increase our workforce, but nobody's talking about building more house faster. Mm-hmm. And we can even bring people to do that.
Yeah.
And of course, there's union in some provinces that won't like it. There's, especially in the construction world, let's break those walls. Let's break those walls and like be welcoming and get workers that we can build faster roads and railways and housing, because that will allow the country to grow faster.
Exactly. And even you just spoke about railways and infrastructures in general. George and I, we were in Europe last month, like literally a month ago. And what's great about Europe is that you have railways everywhere, trains that go, practically everywhere all around Europe. And when you go look at Canada, we have so many opportunities to create those amazing railways. You remember we saw one that was from Quebec City to Windsor, I think, if I'm not wrong. It would be a straight line. And you would be, and this is where 50% of the Canadian population lives, and we do not have a railway. We do not have a train that is high speed that can take 50% of the Canadian population from one city to another, whether it is to work, whether it is to visit. But the reason is not because we are not able to do it. It's just that we don't have enough people to do it. We don't have...
Well, the cost of it would be too high because we have the technology.
Yeah,
we clearly have the technology. I mean, we sell trains to the rest of the world. It's the company Bombardier had been selling trains to the rest of the world. They're built in Europe, but the technology is from us. I think opening our doors is one way to keep growing our economy. Let's jump in a little bit about this duality. We're all francophone. We're all from Quebec. And immigration subject in Quebec is a very, let's call it a hot subject in terms of who wants more immigrations and for which purposes, and the protection of the language, I think, comes at the center of it. The current government is trying to increase the amount of francophone coming to the country, coming to Quebec mainly because they have the right, and I think that's important in terms of legal perspective. Why Quebec is so different than the rest of the world, the rest of Canada. It's mainly because in 1978 we signed. Well, there's multiple treaty over the time, but Quebec signed with the federal government separation of power, saying immigration is our rights. We have the rights to choose our own immigrants because our culture, our language are different, and therefore we want to grow our society encouraging French. So there's a bunch of immigration program that came out of this. And Quebec is probably pretty much the only province with a strong Ministry of Immigration, a strong capacity to make selection of their own immigrants. And that creates debates until today between federal and Quebec on what's our rights, what's the limits. Some programs are decided by the federal government, for example, sponsorships, and security remains a federal capacity because they have more resources to do so. But how do we, and then you have all the other provinces that are trying to come up with program initiative to attract people to their own province. As we said, Canada is a big country, but the concentration of people in big cities and the line of Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Ottawa, big concentration of people. Mm-hmm. And you have that separation between the countryside and the city people. So that's really interesting as well. Like, and you see it in Quebec in the debate for language. How much do you believe we need to go into that internal debate towards the outside world?
And I think this is a very good question to ask. And I think actually it's also very interesting that both George and I are here today, and you ask us this question because George and I both grew up in Quebec, but we grew up in two very different realities. On my side, my parents, they arrived in 1997. My father spoke French because he grew up in Algeria, but my mother didn't. So at 35, she started going to French classes, and it was very important for her to learn the language, to be able to work, to be able to... She was determined with the fact that she was going to spend her life here. She was going to build her life here, so it was important for her to be able to speak the language of the country that she immigrated to. And today, both of my parents speak very good French, and because of the Loi 101, Law 101, the children of immigrants have to go to French school.
Yep.
So on my side, I went to French elementary school and high school, and when I look back at it, this is something that I'm very thankful for, because my French, I consider it to be better than my English. I went to CEGEP in English, and that's where I was able to significantly improve my English. But in terms of French, this is not something that you're going to learn necessarily as well as you will in schools in Quebec.
Yeah.
And when you go outside of the province, the importance that's accorded to French is not as important as it is in Quebec. So, in my opinion, I think that it is important when you come to when you immigrate somewhere that you learn the language.
Yep.
Obviously, most people speak English, but when you have the chance to come to Quebec and you speak French, or you are trying to learn French, you're coming with someone who speaks French. I think it's a great opportunity for you to expand your knowledge, but just in general, just to respect and understand that when you come somewhere, you have to integrate yourself one way or another. So, in my point of view, and George is going to tell his reality, because we have very different realities.
Yeah,
this is something I'm all for. Obviously, I think that there are some limits as to where the state should go to protect French, but that's a debate for another day. But in general, I think that idea of having the children of immigrants to go to French school was a genius idea, and it's the best way to ensure integration.
Yeah. Let me pick your brain on something, George. What do you believe how active the government should be between the selections and the integration? So when it comes to language, and right after I want to talk about the freedoms and the rights that are protected by the Charter, because it defines our values, I believe. And the language rights is one of them. How the government should react or proactively select French-speaking immigrants, for example, in Quebec, or across Canada, right? Because the federal government been creating programs to attract French-speaking across Canada, and that's something we should mention as well. Versus, I don't want to say assimilation, but integrations of new immigrants. And as you mentioned, the Act 101 is exactly what it is. It's exactly what it is. It's making sure that when someone's come to Quebec and he's an immigrant, their kids goes to school, what I call the second generation selections. You select the parents without thinking too much about them. Well, you can think about economic reasons to bring them here. They brings economic impact. But their children will learn French here. And we have tons of money that is invested by our government in this. So what do you think of this? And coming from Laval, I believe the question goes to you.
So I'll preface this by saying that Quebec is probably the most homogenous, in terms of population, is the most homogenous province in probably all of Canada, I would say.
And I would agree. I would agree with you.
I think it really is. So the fact that French is the language that's preferred, I think, in terms of Bill 101, to contrast with Sonia, Sonia's parents migrated after 1976 when Bill 101 was instituted. My grandparents and my mom migrated before 1976 and 1968, and my dad's side of the family in the early 1960s.
Yeah.
So I was grandfathered into the English school system.
Interesting.
So I grew up, and this is one of the pitfalls of Canadian, or I guess Quebec immigration. I grew up in what I call the ghettoization in Canada. So my community, when Sonia first visited my community in Chamonix, there was Greek flags everywhere.
Yeah.
There's Lebanese flags, Moroccan flags. Because all the Greeks stick together.
Yep.
All the Armenians stick together. All the Jews stick together. And this is something that I don't think everybody realizes, that there is a difficulty in integrating some of these populations that were here, at least before Bill 101, into Quebec culture, into the wider society. My grandparents have been here since 1968, so that's 54 years, and they don't. My mom's parents, they don't speak Greek. They don't speak English or French. They only speak Greek. They don't speak English or French. They've been here for 54 years. They're in their mid to late 80s now, 84. My grandfather will be 88 in October. But they do not speak English or French. They've always relied on the kids or the grandkids to go with them to anything that has to do with the government.
But you're the success of this. You speak French and English perfectly.
And Greek, of course.
But
the interesting thing is, this was possible because there's a Greek supermarkets in my neighborhood. There's Greek accountants, Greek lawyers, Greek business people, Greek restaurants. So they're really kind of isolated. And I think this is one of the pitfalls. This is one of the difficulties that the Quebec government, and it's probably similar across Canada, has had in terms of integrating some of the immigrants. And I'll contrast this with the United States. In the United States, immigrants are more easily integrated, at least after the first generation. Because American identity is so powerful. And the Canadian identity, when you contrast it, is it's still it's kind of ethereal. It's kind of still a debate as to what really is Canadian, because what is Canadian to me might be different to what is Canadian to you, Mike, or to you, Sonia. So we're still having this debate because our country, at the end of the day, is only 155 years old. In terms of, to answer the question, in terms of involvement as pertains to integrating and selecting, I think that there should probably be less emphasis on selection, I think. I think that more immigrants would probably be accepted to Quebec if they were a little less selective in terms of language or... and they wouldn't have the labor market shortage that they have right now, right? But in terms of integrating and instilling the Canadian values, rule of law, gender equality, human rights, I think that's crucially important. And we should keep doing that, because that's what makes Canada Canada. When I've traveled to countries that don't necessarily have the rule of law, in terms of I have to bribe somebody to move forward, or I have to bribe a cop, or I have to bribe a bus driver, or a guy that takes me on a ferry. I mean, that's not something that's not a Canadian experience, and most of the world operates like this. Right?
It's interesting.
So I think it's very important that the government keeps instilling Canadian values into our immigrant communities. I absolutely believe
so how would you see then the response of the federal government, what I call the Trudeau dream? And Trudeau's father was trying to establish this beautiful dream, and he was working very hard on establishing it. That's important when we think about Canadian identity and Canadian values. Trudeau's father is the one that created the Canadian Charter of Freedom and Rights. And It was signed in 1982, and I think it defines who we are today, 30 years later, and 40 years later, actually. And this dream's been integrated back into policy with the son, being the Prime Minister of Canada, when he goes like, let's create programs that will bring Francophone across the country. Quebec is not a monopoly for French-speaking people. Let's do more of attracting the right people for our economy and less of we want you to speak French or we want you to, like can we how do you see that policy of making it French selections across the country, this dream of a Canadian bilingual country? Is it realistic?
I think it is realistic, and I think that, as Sonia mentioned regarding Bill 101, I think what's important is to educate young people, children from a young age to learn these languages. I only basically spoke Greek until I was 4 or 5 years old. I didn't have to speak any other language, but I'm perfectly trilingual now because in elementary school I learned English and French. So I think that bilingualism should be taught all across Canada. That's one of our strengths, that we could speak 2 languages. I don't think it's equal. I think Quebec is particularly more French and everywhere else is English with minor exceptions. But I do believe that our bilingualism is one of our strengths in Canada. And I think that we could do more to attract more French speakers, and maybe that will create French communities in English-speaking parts of Canada. That's what I strongly believe, that this is another one of Canadian strengths that really works to our advantage in becoming a great soft power on the international stage and attaining our potential. Really, because there's 220 million French speakers around the world, and being Canadian French speakers, we could influence, I don't want to say influence how things develop there, but we could have this kind of cultural link with these parts of the world. It's very important, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And then I move further in that language aspect. The third most spoken language in Canada is Chinese, Mandarin. There's 1 million Canadians that speak Chinese. And we have this full debate for decades about French English, because it was what was defining us. But now we can move forward, I believe. There's an old saying, like, never laugh at someone that have an accent in English because he speaks another language. Mm-hmm. And I love that expression because I still have my French accent when I speak. But how do we integrate this in the public debate? How do we stop looking at ourselves only from French and English and having Chinese English or Arabic and French or Greek and French, or having French English as official language and then we move forward because there's historical reasons to it. How do you see that? How do you see that, Sonia? Like this integrating other languages into our culture, like being proud of speaking more than 2 languages.
I appreciate you asking me this question, and I know we're talking I know I use a lot of anecdotes to make my points, but I think it's important to I just want to keep it simple. But on my side, I speak 5 languages. 5 languages that 2 of them have been taught to me at school, but 3 of them were taught to me at home with my parents.
Which is fantastic. Really impressive.
And if there's one thing that I know is that speaking more than 2 languages, more than French and English, does not make you any less Canadian. Speaking 5 languages, 6 languages does not make you any less Canadian. You are still speaking French or English. You're still able to you're still sticking to the historical languages of, and even then I say historical language, we could even speak about indigenous languages, should that also be part of the languages that we want to promote in Canada? So I think there's, of course we should move forward because there's nothing wrong with speaking more than 2 languages. There's absolutely nothing wrong. Like and there's nothing wrong with having an accent. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes sometimes, because what's wrong with learning a language or making an effort? So
yeah. Because I see more and more, of course I understand the needs for speaking English when you want to work in the workforce and integrate the workforce as fast as possible. But I believe if we want to increase our numbers faster, we need to be less focused on making sure everybody speaks perfect English. And maybe making sure that we get the right skills of people, the right entrepreneurs. That entrepreneurs don't talk much. They act. They do things, right?
Yeah.
They don't necessarily need to talk to be able to invest in the Canadian economy and to bring the resources from where they come from. They don't necessarily need to have like a 7 IELTS test result in order to have a successful businesses and hire people and create jobs in our economy. So this obsessions with our policy with regards to languages, I feel we're missing the points a little bit.
And I have like a kind of theory. You know, we since the beginning, we're trying to grasp what is Canada, right? What is the Canadian identity? But I think that the reason why there's this kind of obsession with the 2 languages, whether it's learning French or learning English, is that that's the only thing everyone agrees on. That we're a bilingual country. So I guess that all governments, whether it's the provinces or the federal government, they have this obsession because in their point of view, that's the only thing that we can agree on. We can't agree on religion. We can't agree on culture, but we can agree on one thing: language.
Yeah. So
I want to add something, actually. I think if we really think about it, immigration, in terms of the level of proficiency you need to have in either French or English, if you think about it, immigration is really a second-generation goal.
Yeah.
When you really think, and my family is perfect evidence of that.
Yeah.
It's like a prime example, and I think there's thousands of families across Canada that could also attest to this.
Yeah.
But I also think that, for example, in terms of growing your country and in terms of strategy, Singapore, for example, they have a population of Indians, Malays, and Chinese, and they made English the official language of their country after they gained independence from Malaysia because they wanted to attract Western investment. And now everyone speaks English, but they also speak another language in the country. So I think there's a lot to be learned there in terms of embracing languages other than English or even French, because other people from around the world have a lot to offer this beautiful country, and they have their place in this beautiful country if they want it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. It's a really good point. So let's jump in because time is flying. I want to talk a little bit about the Charter of Freedom and Rights. I think if we go and we talk about the Trudeau dreams, like the Trudeau family of what Canada should look like. He was a bit of a philosophical dude, Trudeau father, in many aspects. He tried very hard, and that was continued. Of course, we're talking like by the Liberal government, it's more active in defining what Canada should look like. And the Liberal government have been trying to do that for 40 or 50 years now, 50 years, no doubt. And I want to look at the Charter and can we be proactively identifying those categories that would define what Canada is supposed to look like or what Canada should aim at moving forward? And as law students, I want to hear you about this a little bit. Are you good enough to enumerate the 7 categories right off the bat like this?
Well, obviously there's the languages that we just spoke about. There's the mobility rights. The reason why it came quickly to mind is because of what was happening in January, right?
Yeah.
Where we had people protesting outside saying, well, I can't get out of the country. That's against my mobility rights. But by protesting outside, they were stopping the people from Ottawa to be able to move around the country, the city.
Good example.
Yeah, so that's definitely, and obviously democracy.
Yeah, the democratic rights. I think there's the fundamental freedoms as well, and maybe something like that is really important as well in terms of attracting people. It's the legal rights, which are linked to the rule of law, but also the rights against being discriminated if you're from other origin, or it needs to be fundamental that it's inside our values that everyone is equal. That very big concept, equality of sex, equality of origin based on various factors like skin colors or language or sexual orientation. What about the minority language educational right? That's one of the rights that allowed you to evolve in the society as well, isn't it, George?
Yeah, I benefited from that. I benefited from that in elementary school. I was able to be educated in Greek in Canada, which is something that when I tell people that, they're like very taken aback, very surprised that that's a thing. And I have Armenian friends and Jewish friends that have also benefited from that, and they got to learn their indigenous cultures and get acquainted with their background. So yeah, I think that it's a great thing. And for Canadians or for prospective Canadians who are thinking of migrating here, I think this is an excellent way of getting integrated into the country and investing into the country, because we accept you. I think that's what needs to be said. Canada is inherently, at least philosophically, a accepting country. Yeah. And I think that's in addition to due process, I think these are some of the core concepts behind the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Yeah.
It's the fact that we accept you, and you may be different, you may not look like me, you may not believe the same thing as me, but as long as you don't bother me, you're free to be you. I think that's the message behind it, and I think it's a very honorable and it's a very Canadian thing. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and just to contradict you, what about the chance of opportunity? It's a bit what you're saying as well. Is that the chance of opportunity is that everybody, this American dreams a little bit with the Canadian characteristics of the chance of opportunity. You can come to North America, be accepted for who you are, and strive in society to become whatever you want to be by having, free educations, safety, good old Maslow pyramid, right? At the core of our values, we have this good old, you need to be safe. You need to have a minimum amount of food. You need to have, and then it goes up to fulfillment, like the capacity of accomplish whatever you want to accomplish. And I think that's at the core of what the rights are protecting as well, in that sense. Would that make sense?
Yeah, that's excellent. That's a beautiful way of putting it.
Yeah. And how do we, and maybe we can conclude on this, how the Canadian identity can strive in this diversity? How can we integrate that diversity, and we loop around with the Indigenous conversation we had at the beginning of how diversity become her identity? How can we have this proud of being from everywhere? And everybody is part of this conversation, and we're all striving to build a more equal and a more safe and a more striving society all together.
Well, first of all, I think what you said was amazing in terms of Canada is, even, in terms of statistics, ranks, it's ranked number one in the world in terms of quality of life. I wouldn't change, I wouldn't exchange Canada for any other country in the world. I think it is amazing. And to loop around on our whole debate about Canadian identity, I think the most important thing is that what unites us is our differences.
Yeah.
We are all different. All of us here, we have different stories, we have different backgrounds, but we're all Canadian and we all love our country. And I think that what's important in that whole debate for immigration is that everyone comes here to have a better life.
Yeah.
Everyone comes here to build a better life for their children, their grandchildren, for themselves, and that entire things makes Canada a better country every day. We all work hard. We all work to make sure that Canada becomes a better country every single day. Nobody wants Canada to become worse, right? That's why we have elections sometimes every 2 years. But the point is that we're all Canadian, and we should all be very proud of the country we live in. I know it's very easy to get negative, especially with, the political debates right now that are around certain parties in our country. But nonetheless, Canada is an amazing country. It's a great country. We're very progressive. A lot of countries have done certain things to their people, and they don't want to admit it. But the fact that our government and our people are so open towards reconciliation and that we want to work with the Indigenous peoples of Canada shows also that we're going in the right direction.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What do you think, George? How can we put multiculturalism at the center of our identity?
I think in many ways it already is at the center of the Canadian identity because, like what both of you have said throughout the course of this interview, we all come from somewhere different, but we all come here for the same reason. We want to build a better life for ourselves, for our children, for our families, for our descendants. And by doing that, we also want to build a better Canada. I think it's also important to add that Canada is a project. It's a national state project that's 155 years old, and we're the ones, the people that live here are the ones that are building it.
Yep.
The workers, the education system, the government, our politicians, our leaders, our businessmen and women, the Indigenous people, the Greeks, the Ukrainians, the Quebecois, we're all in this together, and we're building it day by day, and it's going to be whatever we make it.
Yep.
It's whatever we make it. And I think that provided that we stay in line with our core values, as you mentioned, fundamental freedoms and human rights, rule of law, gender equality, and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, I think that we're going to keep being the best country in the world.
That's fantastic.
I truly believe that.
Yeah. No, and we're going to be able to strive to keep building. And we're going to keep building on what we built already. Building on constructions. And I think that's a great way to move forward and to welcome more people to our society and share our values. Thank you so much, George. Thank you so much, Sonia. That's been a very good conversations. And now let's take our mic. Let's get out there. I want to hear from the young students that came here with the dream of joining our society. And that's what Season 2 of the Moving Project will be all about. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have an excellent day. Thank you.